There are people in this world who work where no one sees them, deep underground, in tunnels where trains scream past and the air smells like rust and exhaust and forgotten dreams. People who clean what others dirty, who erase what others leave behind, who move through the city like ghosts while everyone else sleeps. The world doesn't see them, doesn't thank them, doesn't even know their names. But God does. God sees every scrubbed tile, every whispered prayer, every moment of invisible faithfulness. This is a story about a woman who worked underground and discovered that God was preparing to bring her into the light in ways she never imagined. This is not a story about someone who had it all together. This is a story about someone whose life fell apart 15 years ago and never quite got put back together. A woman who lost her husband, lost her career, lost her son, and spent over a decade cleaning subway platforms in the middle of the night, wondering if any of it mattered. But here's what she learned. God doesn't waste anything. Not your pain, not your failures, not even the years you spent invisible and forgotten. He's been writing a story the whole time. And when the moment comes, when you least expect it, He reveals what He's been building in the darkness. I have a powerful testimony to share with you today, but I need you to promise me something. If you stay until the end of this story, you will see how God works in mysterious ways. Subscribe now so you don't miss any testimony that could be the exact message your heart needs today. And tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? And let me ask you, have you ever felt that God answered a prayer when you least expected it? I want to hear your story. Her name was Harper Whitfield. She was 51 years old and she worked the night shift cleaning a subway station in downtown Chicago. Every night from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., while the city slept above her, Harper scrubbed cold concrete, platforms, removed graffiti from tiled walls, and picked up coffee cups and newspaper pages and all the debris commuters left behind without a second thought. She wore a reflective orange vest that made her visible to trains but invisible to people. She wore headphones too, not because she was listening to music, but because they softened the screeching sound of trains rushing through the tunnels, that metal-on-metal shriek that never quite left your ears even when you went home. Harper had dark, brown skin, short natural hair she kept practical and neat, and eyes that carried the weight of too many losses. Her hands were strong, calloused from years of pushing mops and carrying equipment, scarred from countless small cuts and scrapes that came with the work. She moved through the station with efficient, practiced movements, the kind that come from doing the same job night after night for over a decade. Most commuters never even glanced at her. To them, she was part of the infrastructure, necessary but unremarkable, like the tile walls or the fluorescent lights. But Harper was not always a cleaner. 15 years ago, she had been a licensed practical nurse, a good one, working at a community health clinic on the south side, helping people who couldn't afford fancy doctors, making a real difference. She had been married to Marcus, a gentleman who made her laugh, who worked construction and came home tired but happy. They had a son, Micah, who was bright and curious and full of life. Harper's world had been small but good, not wealthy, not glamorous, but solid and real, and hers. Then Marcus got sick, diabetes that went untreated too long because they didn't have good insurance, because he kept putting off doctor visits, because by the time they realized how serious it was, the damage was already done. He died at 43 from complications that could have been prevented. And Harper, practical, strong Harper, fell apart. She stopped showing up to work, stopped answering phone calls, stopped functioning in any meaningful way. She lost her nursing license, lost their apartment, lost herself. Harper's faith had always been quiet and steady, the kind she'd learned from her grandmother, built on Sunday church services and whispered prayers before meals. But it was tested by fire, by grief, by watching the life she'd built crumble into dust. Every morning after her shift now, she sat alone on a wooden bench in the empty station before sunrise, and whispered the same prayer she'd been praying for years. God, I don't need my old life back, just don't waste this one. It wasn't hopeful. It wasn't confident, but it was honest. And Harper had learned that honesty was all she had left to offer. After Marcus died, Harper's life became a slow-motion collapse. She couldn't afford their apartment on one income, especially with medical debt from Marcus's final hospital stay crushing her. She moved into a small basement apartment in an aging building on the south side, the kind of place where the heat barely worked, where you could hear everything your neighbors did through paper-thin walls, where the windows were at street level and you watched people's feet walk past all day. Her son Micah, who had been 18 when his father died, enlisted in the military within months. Harper thought he was running away from grief, but she didn't stop him, couldn't stop him. He was legally an adult, and maybe the structure would help him. Maybe it would give him purpose when everything else felt meaningless. But Micah came back 3 years later changed, not physically wounded, but emotionally shattered. PTSD, silence, distance. He couldn't talk about what he'd seen, couldn't connect with his mother, couldn't seem to find his way back to the person he'd been before. He stayed with Harper for 6 months in that basement apartment, and it was like living with a ghost. He slept all day, stayed up all night, jumped at sudden noises, refused therapy. And then one morning, Harper woke up and found a note on the kitchen table. I need to figure this out on my own. I'm sorry. That was 4 years ago. She hadn't heard from him since, didn't know where he lived, didn't know if he was okay, just knew that she had lost her husband to illness and her son to war, and she was completely alone. The job cleaning subway stations was all Harper could get with her nursing license suspended. She made barely above minimum wage, no benefits, no security, just enough to pay rent on the basement apartment and buy groceries and keep her phone on in case Micah ever called. She had unpaid student loans from nursing school that she couldn't touch. Medical debt collectors still called regularly. And recently, there had been rumors of layoffs. Budget cuts in the city meant the transit authority was looking to reduce staff, and cleaning crews were always first on the chopping block. Then came the diagnosis she kept to herself. Early stage heart failure. Harper had ignored the symptoms for months. The shortness of breath, the swelling in her ankles, the exhaustion that went beyond normal tired. But when she finally went to a free clinic, the doctor's face had told her everything before he even spoke. Your heart is damaged, he said gently. It's manageable with medication and lifestyle changes, but you need treatment, and you need it soon. Treatment Harper couldn't afford, medication she couldn't pay for, follow-up appointments she couldn't make without missing work and losing the job that barely kept her alive. So she said nothing. She took the sample medications the clinic gave her. She ignored the tightness in her chest when she pushed the heavy cleaning cart. She kept showing up to work every night and scrubbing platforms and whispering that same prayer, God, just don't waste this one. January in Chicago is brutal, but this particular January night was something else entirely. The city was hit by a polar vortex, the kind of cold that kills, that turns exposed skin frostbitten in minutes, that makes breathing hurt. The temperature dropped to -15 degrees, with wind chill pushing it to -40. It was the kind of cold that made the news, that shut down schools and businesses, that sent emergency alerts to phones warning people to stay inside. But the subway still ran, and Harper still worked. She arrived at her station bundled in every layer she owned, her breath visible even underground, where the platforms were supposed to be warmer than the streets above. But the cold seeped in through every tunnel entrance, every ventilation shaft, every crack in the old infrastructure. The station felt like a tomb made of ice. Trains were delayed because of the cold, mechanical failures, frozen switches, safety protocols. The platforms were nearly empty, except for a few desperate travelers waiting for trains that might not come. And then Harper started noticing them. Homeless people. More than usual. They were flooding into the subway stations, trying to escape the deadly cold above. Men and women huddled against walls, wrapped in blankets and newspapers and whatever they could find. A couple of teenagers sleeping on benches. An elderly man shivering so badly, Harper thought he might be having a seizure. Security was trying to remove them. Transit policy didn't allow people to stay in stations unless they were traveling. But where were they supposed to go? The shelters were full. The streets would kill them. Harper watched security wake up a man who could barely stand and tell him he had to leave, and something inside her twisted. This wasn't right. This couldn't be what God wanted. People dying in the cold because of policy, because of rules, because nobody wanted to see them. Then she saw her, a young woman, maybe 25, sleeping behind a vending machine in a corner most people didn't notice, and she was holding a child. Couldn't have been more than 3 years. Old, wrapped in a coat so thin it was basically useless, both of them shivering violently even in their sleep. Harper stopped, her mop handle frozen in her hand, and stared. The mother's face was gaunt, exhausted. The child's lips had a blue tinge. They needed help, real help. Now, Harper looked around. Security was making another round, telling people to move along. If they found this woman and child, they'd be sent back out into that killing cold. Harper's heart, her failing, damaged. Heart pounded in her chest. She could walk away, could pretend she hadn't seen them, could focus on her own survival, her own problems, but the image of that child's blue lips wouldn't let her move. That night, when her shift ended at 7 a.m., Harper didn't go home. She sat on her usual wooden bench, but this time she didn't whisper her usual prayer. This time she said something different. God, if you're still listening, if any of this matters, show me what to do. Because I can't keep watching. People suffer and doing nothing, I just can't. Security found them 20 minutes later. Harper watched from across the platform as 2 officers approached the vending machine, flashlights cutting through the dim station. She saw them wake the young woman, saw her startle awake clutching her child, saw the fear in her eyes as she realized she'd been discovered. The officers were talking. Harper couldn't hear the words, but she knew what they were saying. You can't stay here. You need to leave. Policy, rules, orders. The young woman started gathering her things with shaking hands, a torn backpack, a stained blanket, the child now awake and crying softly. She was about to be sent back into that deadly cold. And Harper, 51-year-old Harper, who had spent 15 years invisible, who had lost everything and rebuilt nothing, who had no power and no voice, made a decision that would change everything. She walked over to the officers, her heart hammering, her hands sweating despite the cold. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is there a problem?" The taller officer looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "She can't stay here, Mom. Transit policy." Harper nodded. "I understand, but she's my cousin. She's waiting for me. We're arranging transportation assistance through family services. Should be here within the hour." The lie came out smooth, practiced, like she'd been preparing it her whole life. The officers looked at each other, then at the woman, then back at Harper. "Your cousin?" the second officer said skeptically. Harper met his gaze without flinching. "Yes. She called me in an emergency. I work here, so I told her to wait inside where it's warm. Surely you're not going to send a woman and a small child out into negative 40-degree weather while we're waiting for proper transportation." The officers hesitated. Policy said no loitering, but policy also said use discretion. And sending a child into that cold could mean a dead child, which meant paperwork, which meant problems nobody wanted. 1 hour, the tall officer finally said. "If she's still here after that, she's trespassing." Harper nodded. "Thank you. 1 hour." The officers left. The young woman stared at Harper with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "You don't know me." Harper smiled gently. "I know you're cold. I know you're scared. I know you're trying to keep your baby alive. That's all I need to know." She held out her hand. "My name is Harper. Come with me." She led them to a maintenance room, technically off limits, but Harper had keys to most of the station, and nobody was around to question her at 6 in the morning. Inside was warmer, away from the wind that cut through the platforms. Harper pulled 2 folding chairs from against the wall. "Sit," she said gently. "I'm going to get you something." She went to the break room where staff kept personal supplies and made 2 cups of coffee with her own grounds, her own sugar. She brought them back along with a protein bar from her bag, her breakfast, but she didn't need it as much as they did. The young woman took the coffee with trembling hands and burst into tears. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you so much. I didn't know what to do. The shelter was full. I couldn't let her freeze. I couldn't—" Her voice broke. Harper knelt down and unwound her own scarf, thick, warm, knitted, and wrapped it around the child who had stopped crying and was watching her, with huge, solemn eyes. "What's your name, honey?" Harper asked the little girl. "Lily," the child whispered. Harper smiled. "That's a beautiful name. You're going to be okay, Lily. Your mama's taking good care of you." She turned to the young woman. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she said quietly. Harper nodded. "Okay, Sarah, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay in this room until the morning warming shelters open at 8 a.m. I'm going to write down the address of 3 shelters that take families with children, and I'm going to give you my break room key so you can use the bathroom and get more hot water if you need it. When you leave, lock the door and slide the key under it. I'll find it, okay?" Sarah nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I don't know how to thank you." Harper shook her head. "You don't need to thank me. You just need to keep yourself and Lily safe. That's all that matters." She wrote down the addresses, made sure they had everything they needed, and then returned to her work. Her shift ended an hour later. Sarah and Lily were gone when she checked the maintenance room. The key slid under the door just like Harper had asked. And Harper went home to her basement apartment and prayed, "Thank you for letting me help. Even if nothing else ever changes, thank you for that." Harper returned to work the next night expecting everything to be normal. Expected to clean the same platforms, remove the same graffiti, pick up the same trash. Expected her act of kindness to fade into just another moment in an endless string of invisible moments. She had broken the rules, yes, but nobody knew. Nobody had seen. It was over, but it wasn't over. 3 days later, Harper's supervisor called her into the office. A man named Davis, 50s, perpetually tired, decent enough but bound by policy. Harper's heart sank as she walked in. Someone must have reviewed the security footage. Someone must have seen her lie to the officers, seen her take Sarah and Lily into the maintenance room. She was about to be fired. After 15 years of showing up faithfully every single night, she was going to lose the one fragile thing keeping her alive. She sat down across from Davis, hands folded in her lap, preparing herself for the blow. But Davis's expression was strange, not angry exactly, but thoughtful, complicated. "Harper," he said slowly, "I need to show you something." He turned his computer monitor toward her. Security footage. There she was, walking over to the officers, talking to them, leading Sarah and Lily away, every moment captured in grainy black and white. Harper's throat tightened. "I can explain," she started, but Davis held up his hand. "I don't need an explanation, Harper. I know what you did. You violated transit policy. You lied to security officers. You used a maintenance room for unauthorized purposes." He paused. "And you saved that woman and child's life." Harper blinked, confused. "I don't understand." "Let me tell you something," Davis said, leaning back in his chair. "I've been trying for 3 years to get approval for a pilot program, turning underused subway stations into overnight warming shelters during extreme weather, a place where homeless individuals can stay without being arrested or removed. A partnership between transit and social services, but every proposal I've submitted has been ignored. Budget constraints, liability concerns, policy limitations, always something." He gestured at the screen. Then I saw this footage, and I realized we already have people willing to lead with humanity. We already have staff who understand that policy shouldn't trump human life. So I did something. I sent this footage to my director and to the local news. Harper's eyes widened. You what? Davis smiled. Don't worry, I edited it to protect the woman and child's identities, but your face, your actions, those are clear as day. Harper felt panic rising in her chest. Why would you do that? I could lose my job. I could... But Davis shook his head. You're not losing your job, Harper. But things are going to change for you, probably quickly. And I wanted you to know before it happened. The story is running tomorrow morning. And I'm using the public response to push my proposal through, because if the city sees what you did, what you were willing to risk, they'll have to respond. Harper went home that night terrified. She didn't sleep. She imagined every worst-case scenario. The transit, authority firing her anyway, the media twisting her story, her face plastered everywhere as the woman who broke the rules. She imagined collectors finding her through the news coverage, her landlord seeing her and deciding she was too much of a liability. She imagined losing the basement apartment, ending up on the streets herself, dying of heart failure in some frozen doorway. The next morning, the story ran. Local news picked it up. Subway worker risks job to save mother and child. During polar vortex, the footage played on loop. Harper's face, her voice telling the officers Sarah was her cousin, her unwinding her scarf for Lily. Within hours, it was everywhere. Social media, national news, people calling Harper a hero, people demanding the city do something. But Harper didn't feel like a hero. She felt exposed, vulnerable, terrified. She turned off her phone, stayed in her apartment, waited for the other shoe to drop, because good things didn't happen to people like her. They just didn't. God might see her, might use her, but he didn't rescue her. That's not how her life worked. The call came 2 days later, not from Davis, from someone higher up, a woman named Patricia Chen, director of the Transit Authority's Community Relations Department. Ms. Whitfield, she said, her voice warm and professional. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow at noon. There's a position we'd like to discuss. Harper's voice came out strangled. A position? Patricia laughed gently. Yes, not a termination, not a reprimand. An opportunity. Can you make it? Harper arrived at Transit Authority headquarters the next day, feeling like she was walking to her own execution. But Patricia met her with a smile and led her to a conference room where Davis was already waiting, along with 2 other people Harper didn't recognize. Harper, Patricia began, thanks to the public response to your story, we've received emergency funding to launch a pilot program. We're partnering with the city's Department of Family Services to turn 3 subway stations into overnight warming shelters during extreme weather. Staff trained to connect people with resources, medical screening, transportation to longer-term shelters, a real system. She paused. And we need someone to coordinate it, someone who understands transit operations, someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone with the compassion and courage to actually care about the people we're trying to help. Patricia slid a folder across the table. We'd like to offer you the position of Community Outreach Coordinator for the Transit Authority's Winter Shelter Initiative. Harper stared at the folder like it might explode. I'm a cleaner, she said quietly. I don't have credentials. I don't have... One of the other people at the table, a black man in his 60s, spoke up. You have what matters, Ms. Whitfield. You have heart, and we can train everything else. He smiled. My name is Reverend James. I run 3 shelters on the south side. I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I'm telling you what you did for that woman and child. That's the only credential that matters. The position came with daytime hours, full medical benefits, a salary nearly double what she'd been making, and the responsibility of training transit staff to respond to vulnerable individuals and trauma situations. Harper sat there, hands shaking, unable to process. I don't understand. she whispered. Why me? Patricia's voice was gentle. Because you saw someone suffering and you acted, without hesitation, without calculation. You just acted. That's exactly the person we need. Harper accepted. Of course she accepted. How could she not? And within a week, her entire life changed. She had health insurance for the first time in 15 years. She scheduled appointments with a cardiologist, started proper treatment for her heart failure, got medication that actually worked. She gave notice on the basement apartment and found a small studio with actual sunlight. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe and hers. She worked daytime hours coordinating the shelter program, training staff, connecting people with resources, doing work that mattered in ways cleaning platforms never had. But the greatest miracle was still coming. 3 weeks after the news story ran, Harper's phone rang from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, had learned to ignore unknown calls from years of debt collectors. But something made her pick up. Hello? There was a long pause, then a voice she hadn't heard in 4 years. Mom? Harper's knees went weak. Micah? Her son's voice was quiet, thick with emotion. I saw you on TV, helping those people, and I didn't know you were still that strong. Micah came home. Not immediately. Healing takes time. But slowly, carefully, he came back into Harper's life. They met for coffee first. Awkward, painful, full of long silences. But Harper didn't push, didn't demand explanations, just listened when he was ready to talk and stayed present when he wasn't. Micah told her about the nightmares, the guilt, the feeling of being broken beyond repair. And Harper told him about the 15 years she'd spent cleaning subway platforms, about the prayer she whispered every morning, about learning that God doesn't waste anything, not even the years that feel lost. Micah started coming to Sunday dinners at Harper's new apartment, started calling once a week, then twice. And then he made a decision. He was going to get help, real help. He started therapy with a counselor who specialized in PTSD, joined a veterans support group, and eventually he started working as a peer counselor for other veterans, helping men and women who were struggling just like he had, showing them it was possible to come back from the edge. The shelter program he worked for, it was one of the programs partnered with Harper's initiative. Mother and son both helping people survive, both transformed by the same crisis that had almost destroyed them. They worked together sometimes, Harper coordinating resources while Micah counseled the veterans who came through. And every time Harper saw her son helping someone, saw him finding purpose in his pain, she whispered the same prayer. Thank you. Thank you for not wasting it. Harper's health stabilized. With proper treatment and medication, her heart condition became manageable. The cardiologist was cautiously optimistic. She wouldn't run marathons, but she could live a normal life. The medical bills from her husband's death were negotiated down with help from a non-profit financial counselor connected to the shelter program. Her student loans were put into an income-based repayment plan she could actually afford. For the first time in 15 years, Harper wasn't drowning, she was breathing. The shelter program expanded beyond just winter. They created year-round support services, not just emergency warming, but job placement assistance, mental health referrals, substance abuse counseling, family reunification services. Harper trained dozens of transit workers in trauma-informed care, in how to see people instead of problems, in how to offer dignity instead of just compliance. The work was hard, some days heartbreaking, but it mattered. Every single day it mattered. Sarah, the young woman Harper had helped that freezing night, came back. She found Harper through the program, wanted to thank her properly. She'd gotten into permanent housing through emergency assistance. Lily was healthy, thriving in a Head Start program. Sarah was working part-time and finishing her GED. You saved us, she told Harper, crying. Not just that night, but by showing me that people still care, that I wasn't invisible. Harper hugged her and whispered, you were never invisible, not to God, never to God. The program became a model for other cities. Transit authorities from New York, Boston, Los Angeles, Angeles. They all sent representatives to study Chicago's system, to learn how Harper and her team had transformed subway stations from places that pushed people out into places that welcomed them in. Harper spoke at conferences, shared her story, trained people in other cities. She was terrified at first, public speaking, being visible, being seen. But Reverend James reminded her, "You spent 15 years invisible, doing God's work in the dark. Now He's bringing you into the light to multiply." Harper started mentoring other women who were struggling, single mothers, widows, women who had lost careers and couldn't find their way back. She hosted small gatherings at her apartment, nothing formal, just coffee and conversation, and honest talk about survival and faith and how to keep going when everything falls apart. She told them about the wooden bench in the subway station, about the prayer she'd whispered for years, about how God had been building something she couldn't see. The women listened, some crying, some nodding, all recognizing themselves in Harper's story, and they left different. Not fixed. You don't fix years of trauma in one conversation, but less alone, less invisible, more convinced that their lives still mattered, that God hadn't forgotten them, that it wasn't too late to become something new. Harper's apartment became a sanctuary for the overlooked, just like those subway platforms had become sanctuaries for the homeless. Micah thrived in his work with veterans. He met a woman at the counseling center, another counselor, someone who understood trauma and healing, and they started dating, slowly, carefully, building something real. He brought her to meet Harper, nervous like a teenager. And Harper looked at this woman her son had chosen, kind, strong, wounded but healing, and felt gratitude so deep it made her chest ache. Her son was coming back to life. Her son was going to be okay. The basement apartment Harper had lived in for 15 years, the building was sold and renovated into supportive housing for people transitioning out of homelessness. Harper attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony and stood in front of the place that had been her prison and her survival, and she blessed it. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping me alive in the dark. And thank you for bringing me into the light." On a quiet Tuesday evening, 6 months after everything changed, Harper stood on the same subway platform she used to clean. But this time she wasn't holding a mop. She was handing out blankets, thick, warm ones donated by a church, to people who had come to the overnight shelter. The train still passed, screeching through the tunnels. The wind still cut through the platform. The fluorescent lights still hummed, but everything was different. A man approached her, maybe 40, gaunt, clearly homeless. He took the blanket hesitantly and said, "Thank you, ma'am." Harper smiled. "You're welcome. There's hot coffee inside, and we have caseworkers who can help connect you with housing resources if you're interested." The man nodded slowly. "Maybe. I'll think about it." And he walked toward the shelter entrance. Harper watched him go and closed her eyes. "You didn't waste it," she whispered to God, to the empty platform, to the years of pain and survival and invisible faithfulness. You didn't waste any of it. Not the grief, not the cleaning, not the 15 years underground. You were writing a story I couldn't see, building something I didn't understand, and now I get it. Now I finally get it. Harper Whitfield's story didn't end with her becoming who she used to be. She never got her nursing license back, never returned to that old life, because God had something better, not easier, not simpler, but better. He turned the threat of layoffs into leadership. He turned grief into purpose. He turned a subway cleaner into a coordinator of mercy. He took a woman the world had written off and wrote her name across the city as someone who mattered, who made a difference, who changed lives not despite her brokenness, but because of it. This is the truth Harper's life taught the world. God sees those who work underground. God turns quiet obedience into public transformation. He wastes nothing, not your pain, not your failures, not even the years you spent invisible and forgotten. He's been writing your story the whole time, and sometimes the miracle isn't becoming who you used to be, it's becoming who you were always meant to be. Harper was never meant to stay underground. She was meant to work there just long enough to learn what compassion costs, what faithfulness looks like when nobody's watching, what it means to choose mercy over policy. And then, when the moment came, God brought her into the light and said, "Now show them. Show them what I've been building in you. Show them that I waste nothing." If you made it this far, it was not by chance. God placed this story in front of you because you needed to hear it. Now I want you to do something for me. Subscribe to the channel so you can keep receiving these stories that feed the soul. And in the comments, tell me which country you are from and share this with me. What did this testimony leave in your heart? Is there something in your life you need to surrender to God today? Share your prayer, your pain, or your joy. Here, we are a family, and your story matters.